American serial killer, Charles Edmund Cullen, a nurse by profession, was responsible for the deaths of many patients over a 16-year period. He was eventually arrested in 2003. He admits to killing close to 40 people, but only 29 murders could be confirmed. Join me as we explore the life and crimes of Charles Cullen. Welcome to Simply Told. On the 22nd of February 1960, in West Orange, New Jersey, Charles Cullen was born. His youth wasn't an easy one as he was constantly picked on at school, describing that period as miserable. His depression gets the better of him, first attempting suicide at the age of 9. Charles drops out of school and joins the Navy, where he again attempts to take his own life. He survives, but was later discharged from the Navy on medical grounds. The 6th of December 1977, Florence Cullen, Charles's mother, dies in a car accident at the age of 55. Charles was extremely upset with the hospital as they failed to inform him of her death. Also, instead of returning the body to the family, the hospital cremates her remains. Charles decides on becoming a nurse, enrolling at Mountainside Hospital's nursing school in New Jersey. After graduating in 1986, he was employed at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston. Later, Charles marries his then-fiancée, Adrienne Taub, in 1987. They get busy and starts a family, giving birth to the first of 2 daughters later that year. Adrienne notices something odd about Charles. She noticed that Charles would at times do sadistic things, like torture the dogs. But after a while, this behavior really starts to bug Adrienne, till one day in 1993, she files a restraining order against Charles. In it, she claims seeing him spike his friends' drinks with lighter fluid. And that he left their kids in the care of the sitter for a week. But Charles simply denies her claims, saying she's exaggerating. The 11th of June 1988, while working as a nurse at St. Barnabas Medical Center, Charles administers medication to a patient. But what he really injected into that poor victim was a lethal dose of not good stuff. This was his MO. He goes around at night and administers lethal doses from whatever vials he can get his hands on. Even overdosing a patient on insulin. January 1992, the random patient deaths was investigated by the hospital, that would coincidentally be about the same time Charles would resign. The following month, Charles finds employment at Warren Hospital, in Phillipsburg. He increases his body count, injecting 3 women with a lethal dose of the heart medication, digoxin, killing them. March 1993. Charles's strange behavior resurfaces. He finds himself breaking into a co-worker's apartment while she and her son are asleep, but leaves without harming them. He was caught and receives 1-year probation for the crime. After yet another failed suicide attempt, Charles was sent to a psychiatric clinic to deal with his obvious depression. But that wouldn't be the end of his attempts at death. Later that year, an elderly cancer patient reports that Charles injected her with something, which turns out to be not good. She dies the next day. After protest from the woman's son claiming her death was not from natural causes, Charles was asked, and agrees on taking a lie detector test, which he surprisingly passed. After dodging that bullet, Charles continues to work at that hospital, but only for a while. Barely a year later he finds employment at Hunterdon Medical in the intensive care unit. Charles claims to harming no one during his stint in the unit. Detectives could not follow up on this bit of information due to documents and reports of that period was unfortunately destroyed. Between January and September 1996, he admits to killing 5 patients after administering a lethal dose of digoxin. Charles then finds employment at Morristown Memorial Hospital. But, this hospital had higher standards and after a short stint, he was fired for his poor performance. He stayed at home and unemployed for a while, and with that, his depression brings him down. Because of his finances, or the lack thereof, he had to stop making his child support payments. With all this going on, he lands up in a psychiatric facility. Charles remained unemployed for 6 months, but his luck finally changes and he finds work at Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, in February 2008. But due to his murderous ways, he'd soon be queuing the unemployment line again. He was fired after trying to administer a lethal dose of whatever he had in his syringe, leaving the patient with a broken arm. Now at Liberty Hospital. Charles was responsible for the death of a patient, but fortunately for him another nurse was blamed. November 1998. He leaves Liberty and ends up working for Eastern Hospital. And murders his next victim on the 30th of December 1998. It was discovered that the victim had a lethal dose of digoxin in their blood. Even with this evidence, it was inconclusive. There was no way to definitively prove that Charles administered the lethal dose. Due to liability concerns, the hospital decides to take no real action against Charles. March 1999, Charles was back on the job doing his rounds at his new place of employment, Allentown's Lehigh Valley Hospital, Cedar Crest. But only gets to kill 1 patient there. Barely a month later, Charles leaves Lehigh Valley and was offered a job at St. Luke's Hospital in Bethlehem. Here, Charles gets to kill 5 patients. He was never suspected for the killings. That's until a co-worker discovers vials in the waste bin. June 2002. After an investigation, it was later revealed that Charles had taken the medication. He was forced to resign. The hospital then informs the county district attorney of their suspicions. The investigation leads nowhere, and the case was eventually dropped due to the lack of evidence. September 2002. Charles was employed at Somerset Medical Center in Somerville, New Jersey. Here, it's believed he kills 13 patients, administering a lethal doses of digoxin, insulin, and epinephrine. The hospital starts paying more attention to Charles. He was seen entering the records room and went through the files of patients that he wasn't assigned to. The hospital's drug dispensary records revealed Charles requesting medication that none of his patients were prescribed. July 2003. After investigating the suspicious deaths of patients, officials from the New Jersey Poison Information and Education Systems sent out an official warning to Somerset Hospital, stating they may have a staff member killing patients. October 2003. After a delay, the hospital finally contacts the New Jersey State Police, when a patient suspiciously dies. He was fired on the 31st of October 2003. But the police kept their eye on him. Detectives needed more than circumstantial evidence. They receive usable audio evidence that was obtained from an acquaintance he'd met, who was wearing a wire. Charles was eventually arrested on the 12th of December 2003, and was charged with murder and attempted murder. He agrees to fully cooperate with the authorities. In exchange, the prosecution won't seek the death sentence. His trials. April 2004. Charles pleads guilty for the murder of 13 patients while at Somerset. And hardly a month later he pleads guilty to an additional 3 deaths. November 2004. He pleads guilty again, for the deaths of 6 more patients. Charles was found guilty and sentenced to serve 11 life terms behind bars. About a week later, on the 10th of March 2006 at a sentencing hearing, Charles was handed an additional 6 life sentences. He's currently hanging out at New Jersey State Prison. Sidebar. In that courtroom, Charles was being disrespectful to the judge, by repeatedly saying, "Your Honor, you need to step down." The judge allowed him to do this for close to 30 minutes. Now fed up with his behavior, the judge had his mouth gagged with cloth and duct tape his mouth shut. Even then, he was still mumbling the phrase, "Your Honor, you need to step down." Charles's reason for the murders was to spare patients unnecessary pain and discomfort, saving them from nursing staff dehumanizing them during a code blue emergency procedure. But not all of his victims were terminal. Some were on their way to recovery. The reason Charles chose digoxin and insulin instead of harder drugs was that hospitals kept a close eye on medication that could be sold on the streets. Insulin and digoxin had no real value outside the hospital, and was not on the hospital's radar.